Hi everyone, and welcome to Truth Over News. New behind-the-scenes planning documents disclosed by Senators Chuck Grassley and Josh Hawley contain shocking evidence of the real purpose of Biden's Orwellian Disinformation Governance Board, which became known as Biden's Ministry of Truth. The documents are part of a trove of documents given to the two senators by a whistleblower. Shockingly, the whistleblower files show that the board was conceived as a means for the Biden regime to push tech companies to censor Americans. Two state attorneys general, Missouri's Eric Schmidt and Louisiana's Jeff Landry, are now seeking a preliminary injunction to stop Biden and his administration from colluding with social media giants such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to suppress free speech. These latest moves and revelations go to the heart of the First Amendment, the constitutional right to exercise free speech without government interference. That right has been progressively undermined, in particular since the start of the COVID pandemic. But there has been little pushback until now. The newly released documents show, for the first time, the lengths that Biden's Ministry of Truth wanted to go to suppress free speech, including operationalizing public-private partnerships between the Department of Homeland Security and Twitter. The Constitution does not have a place for operationalizing public-private partnerships in regulating speech. The First Amendment forbids it. It states that Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. It was added to in 1868 by the 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause, which guarantees that liberty cannot be taken away without due process. The 14th Amendment extends the reach of the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, to all actions by federal, state, and local governments. To put it simply, no branch or part of government, including legislatures, courts, juries, executive agencies, and officials, is allowed to take actions that censor, suppress, or interfere with free speech. So even if Anthony Fauci or anyone else in the government bureaucracy thought it was terribly important that this or that not be said, they are constitutionally banned from taking any action to suppress it. But contrary to all that, we now know that Biden's Ministry of Truth was specifically set up as a coordination and deconfliction mechanism, convening to discuss threats, assessments, response actions, and engagements as often as warranted. A DHS strategy document that was also leaked in connection with Biden's Ministry of Truth now reveals that the government is discussing to empower partners to mitigate MDM threats. MDM is an Orwellian acronym that stands for mis, dis, and malinformation. Among the topics which the Ministry of Truth regards as MDM are all the usual suspects. Conspiracy theories about the validity and security of elections, disinformation surrounding the validity of the 2020 election, falsehoods surrounding US government immigration policy, and of course, so-called disinformation related to the origins and effects of COVID-19 vaccines or the efficacy of masks. Just the last point there really highlights the nefariousness of the entire initiative. Just to give an example, for at least 100 years since the Spanish flu of 1918, the efficacy of masks has been the topic of many scholarly studies, most or all of which determined that masks are not effective at protecting against submicroscopic viruses. A study in the American Journal of Public Health from 1920 that measured the efficacy of mandated masks during the Spanish flu determined that masks have not been demonstrated to have a degree of efficiency that would warrant their compulsory application for the checking of epidemics. But then, all of a sudden in 2020, the government decreed that not only are we not allowed to say these facts, we're not even allowed to discuss the issue, unless we follow and obey the official line. Note also the term origins and effect of COVID-19 vaccines in the Ministry of Truth document. No one has argued over the origins of the so-called vaccines, just about their effect. Is the reference to origin a veiled attempt at bringing in discussion of the origins of the virus itself under control of the Ministry of Truth? We don't know for sure. What we do know is that the entire initiative has been exposed as an unconstitutional effort to silence Americans with the help of big tech. Before the whistleblower documents were released, Secretary for Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, claimed that the ministry would do its work without infringing on free speech, protecting civil rights and civil liberties, and the right to privacy. That turned out to be incorrect. Mayorkas also professed that what the ministry was doing does not infringe on free speech, does not infringe on civil liberties. That too turned out to be untrue. Now that the documents proving the ministry's real purpose are out, the Biden regime has paused the ministry's work, at least officially. Of course, the corporate media is blaming the so-called pause on right-wing attacks, or alternatively on poor conception, as if implementation is the problem and not the idea itself. Biden's people know that their ministry would not pass muster if challenged in court. The First Amendment breaches are too obvious and too blatant. That is the real reason the ministry is officially on pause. But that does not mean that the Biden regime and the DC bureaucracy is not continuing its censorship efforts behind the scenes, which is how they were doing things before starting the ministry in the first place. In many ways, it shows us the incompetent but hubristic nature of Biden's administration, that they tried to formalize government censorship at all. It was always going to be more effective done quietly in the background, as they did before. And this is where the two attorneys general, Eric Schmidt and Jeff Landry, come in. Last month, Schmidt and Landry filed a lengthy case against Biden, Fauci, Mayorkas, Ministry of Truth head Nina Jankowicz, as well as others. The case essentially seeks declaratory relief, meaning that the state attorneys general are asking the court to declare that government officials are not allowed to interfere in the free speech rights of Americans. But such cases take time to get anywhere, that is, if they get anywhere at all. So Schmidt and Landry have filed a new motion based on the just released whistleblower documents that had been given to Senators Grassley and Hawley. The new motion seeks what is called a preliminary injunction. That means that Schmidt and Landry are asking the court to order defendants such as Biden and Fauci not to do anything that might interfere with what anyone says on social media. It is a far more drastic move than the case they brought last month, because they're asking the court to issue that order without having heard the full arguments. But the whistleblower documents and the fact that DHS lied about the function of the Ministry of Truth both make it very clear why such a move is urgently needed. Perhaps the most nefarious aspect of the recent government collusion to suppress free speech has been the fact that it created the impression with vast sections of the public that there was an actual consensus on the various topics that were being censored. That masks were stopping the virus, that vaccines were super effective, and of course that the virus came out of nature and not out of the Wuhan lab.